We are going to talk about the relationship between the North Korean Kim dynasty, currently with Kim Jong-un in charge, and its relationship with Christianity. Yep, you heard that right. Stick with me because it only gets weirder, wilder, and I promise the next few minutes will explain why the country is the way it is and how power works when leaders aren't simply followed, but believed in, like gods. This is about how politics can turn into faith and how cults of personality, once they're built, can outlast wars, sanctions, even famine. We'll take a closer look at how this North Korean dictatorship is likely here to stay.
I think a lot of people look at North Korea and they see a nuclear-armed nation state. And that's not wrong. I'm not trying to say that is incorrect. It definitely has nuclear weapons, and I don't think they're ever going to give them up. Though, if you really want to understand North Korea at a deeper level, I think you have to understand it as something else. I think you need to understand that North Korea at heart is a religious society. And it's a religious society that's built around Kim Il-sung and his descendants, his successor, Kim Jong-il, and then his successor, Kim Jong-un.
That is Jonathan Cheng. He's a journalist with the Wall Street Journal and author of Korean Messiah, Kim Il-sung and the Christian Roots of North Korea's Personality Cult. And indeed, the founder of the regime, Kim Il-sung, was super Christian.
He set himself up as a god king. He deified himself and made him not just the leader of North Korea, but this god, this messiah figure. And what was so interesting to me was to learn a little bit more about his upbringing. It's not a secret that he grew up in a pretty devout Christian family. In fact, the whole city that he grew up in, Pyongyang, now the capital of his dynasty, was once known as the Jerusalem of the East. It was perhaps the most Christianized city in all of Asia. It had a 120-acre compound in the middle of the city, which was filled with churches, missionary schools, colleges, hospitals, schools for the deaf and the blind, YMCAs, all the rest of it. And today that's all gone. It's been replaced with statues of Kim Il-sung. But when Kim Il-sung himself was growing up in this city, this was perhaps one of the most Christian cities, maybe even in the whole world. His parents were devout Christians. His grandparents were devout Christians. And he himself was raised in this Christian kind of a bubble. He grew up not only going to church every Sunday with his parents, he also learned to play the organ in church. He performed in church plays. He taught Sunday school. He attended a missionary-founded school for a few years. He lived in the home of a pastor when he was a teenager. He led a church youth group. He was thoroughly steeped in the church. And so when he comes to power just at the age of 33, he draws upon, either subconsciously or consciously, upon this upbringing that he had.
In other words, Jonathan's saying Kim Il-sung's Christian upbringing contributed to the rollout of his eventual cult of personality.
He recognized how powerful faith can be, how people, humans, we need to believe something, and sometimes we'll put people up on a pedestal, we'll idolize, we'll even worship other people. Well, he understood that, and at a certain level, he recognized that if you can use that as a bit of a blueprint, you can have a situation where the object of worship isn't Jesus Christ, isn't God, isn't Buddha, isn't someone else. It's him, and it's his family.
Now, I'm not Christian, but if I was, I might feel this premise sounds pretty blasphemous. But with his almost 800-page book and more than a decade of research, including speaking to leaders and experts of the Christian faith, Jonathan says, yeah, of course they're not the same, but there are parallels in the rituals.
So if you go to North Korea today, you won't actually see Kim Jong-un's image everywhere, but you will see his grandfather's image everywhere. You'll see it in the portraits that are on the walls of basically every North Korean home and public building, schools, workplaces, factories, all the rest. You'll see him literally pinned over the hearts of every North Korean. They have these badge pins with his face on it. If you drive down the street, you'll see his statues on the corner. You won't see advertisements, you won't see billboards, you'll see propaganda posters, murals, mosaics that portray him. Really, you look around and you look at the cosmology, the theology that they have in the state, the rituals that they have, the doctrine that they have. The first thing you do in the morning when you wake up is you go to your living room where there's a portrait of Kim Il-sung and his son, Kim Jong-il. You have a government-issued duster, and your first task of the day is to go and carefully dust the portraits. When you walk by his statues, and there are many statues across the country, you are to bow. On all your most important days, your graduation day, your wedding day, New Year's Day, Kim Il-sung's birthday, the holiest day on the North Korean calendar.
And what's interesting is that while other cults of personality have faded with time or didn't last too long, relatively speaking, think Joseph Stalin, who held that status for about a decade, or even Mao Zedong, when those leaders died, the cult calmed down. Jonathan argues that kind of the opposite has been happening in North Korea.
We've only seen this cult of personality grow over time. And so today, in the year 2026, it's been more than 8 decades, and this is a nuclear-armed state. The nuclear arms protect them against external threats, but the cult of personality protects them against threats from the inside. And we see Kim Jong-un already making preparations perhaps for a 4th generation of succession, because we see him with his daughter, perhaps 12 or 13 years old. We think her name is Kim Ju-ae. We don't know for sure whether she's the successor, but it sure looks like it. And at minimum, what we have is we have a family dynasty here that has been in power for 3 generations, and that may last into a 4th generation and into a brand new century.
Which raises the question of the durability of the North Korean regime. How long can this so-called hermit kingdom last, with its isolated and fragile planned economy always on the edge of collapse, and this most closed of all political systems? Jonathan looks at what's been happening around the world this year and believes, despite everything, Pyongyang is here to stay.
So North Korea, whether we like it or not, this state, I don't think is going anywhere anytime soon. What we saw President Trump do earlier this year with Maduro in Venezuela, with the Ayatollah in Iran, I don't think is going to happen in North Korea. You don't see too much discussion of this, in part because the goal in Iran was to prevent Iran from getting to a nuclear weapons sort of a status. North Korea, whether or not it's acknowledged in Washington or not, has attained that status. They've conducted 6 nuclear tests, and they've demonstrated that they can put a nuclear warhead, presumably, on an intercontinental ballistic missile that's capable of reaching almost any point on Earth, including the continental US. This is not a country that you want to launch a decapitation strike on. And I think that even prior to Venezuela and to Iran earlier this year, there were a lot of doubts about whether North Korea would ever be willing to give up its nuclear arsenal. I think after the events that we've seen earlier this year, I don't think that there's any chance that North Korea will give up its weapons, because it has seen what has happened in these other countries, and they've seen what happens when you try to negotiate. And I think that they're feeling we're better off with our nuclear weapons. And again, they're insulated both from external threats with those nuclear weapons and the internal threats with their cult of personality. I don't want to say that this is a state that will continue for years or decades to come, because I simply don't know. But I don't know that I would bet against it right now.
So, what do you think? Does this North Korean belief system ensure the Kim dynasty's survival? And what do you make of Jonathan's research looking at the regime's relationship with Christianity? Let us know in the comments. That's all for now. DW News is giving you the latest and also sharing deep dives on here and across the rest of social media. I'm Melissa Chan. Until next time.